Now we're going to show inter-region policy compute engine failure, right? This is that catastrophic event, okay? And this is, so we've had this PCE running in that DR site, and I showed it to you. So, sorry.
Poor guy.
Just to add more pressure to you.
Each one of these is a separate segment.
Sorry. So we have had 3 regions running, and that's where the majority of our activity has been taking place today, okay? But I showed you we've had this DR site just sort of sitting in the background. And by the way, I'm Matthew Glenn. I run product management. I just got in trouble. I run product management at Illumio. This is my faithful and awesome TME, Anand Godi, who is driving the car today. And we're now going to show you our 4th demonstration where we are going to fail over to a DR site, okay? Now, remember, we have 3 regions. There's US West, US East, and EU East, and we've had this DR site sitting in the background. So what's going to happen now is we're going to lose that EU East, that Frankfurt data center, and we're going to fail it over to AWS Ireland, okay? And what's important here is the VENs find their PCEs via a DNS name, so you can use global server load balancing to fail VENs over to different regions, okay? And that is how you can move things around as you see fit. Also, it gives our customers great flexibility if they want to have smaller data centers within regions. We have one customer that has over 100 data centers, where a data center could be where they have racks and racks and racks of servers. A data center could be a co-location facility in Kuala Lumpur where they have one Linux 5.6 host. A location could be a VPC running in Amazon or a subscription running in Azure. So they have over 100 locations where they run things. And so they don't have over 100 members of their supercluster. So what they do is they use GSLB to point their workloads in a region to a cluster wherever they see fit, okay? So in this case, we're going to fail these VENs over to that DR site that was running. And
Matt, one more point. It's actually inter-region.
The site, this is a typo. It's inter, it's not intra.
Yeah, it's inter-region. Sorry about that.
Inter-region.
Inter-region failover. Sorry. Typo. And just because we had 3 data centers before, now we're going to bring up 4, okay? So, but one of them is going to go bye-bye, and that's okay. So let's go ahead and bring it up, Mr. Anand.
Yes.
All right. So let's go look at our little region here. So we've had those 3. There's that 3 failures. Let's go to the leader, if you don't mind, so we can show them. This is also being reflected at the leader, okay? And you can see here that in our little health thing, we can see that there's some failures going on here. And we see, remember, that's the Frankfurt region, that EU East region that we had earlier. And it's now in the master, it's showing up that we have a problem here, okay? But we want to kill off, or we're going to end up having some sort of complete failure of that EU East region. Maybe when we want it to happen, maybe there's a natural disaster, who knows what's going to happen. But that region is now going to go bye-bye, okay? So what we're going to do, though, is let's show one of the workloads in that region, because we can also show you which PCE it's actually honed into, okay? So let's go find one of those workloads, if you don't mind.
Oh, we might be ahead of you.
Yo, you're ahead of me. You started killing it off already. Okay, so we've lost that PCE already, because Anand's a little bit ahead of me. That's okay. And
that's okay.
We can't even reach it anymore, okay? So what should happen when that happens is, you can see it's unable to even speak to it now. What should happen is GSLB should be able to connect, is going to click in here. And what GSLB is going to do is, once it realizes that the health checks in Frankfurt are no longer functional, it's going to start moving those VENs over to that new region. That happens really rapidly. So let's talk about what that means from policy, okay? In that moment where those VENs cannot reach their policy compute engine, they're going to go into a fail freeze mode. So it doesn't mean we're going to start dropping traffic on the floor. It means it's going to retain its last known good policy state, okay? At this moment in time, in the leader, you could actually still be pushing policies. You could be changing things as you see fit. That doesn't mean your business has to stop. It simply means that the VENs, those antennas in that region that had the failure, are now going to fail over to that new DR site. And let's also remember that DR site already has a full listing of all the workloads in all the regions, right? Because we were already replicating it to the DR site. It already has all the policies for all those remote regions, because that was part of how Supercluster works. The only thing that's going to be different is that a bunch of things that were unmanaged workloads before are now going to become managed workloads within that region, okay? And so let's go ahead and bring it up. So Anand we failed over that EU East region. We saw it wasn't functional anymore. We had the screen that shows that website is no longer working.
Yep.
And but now we're going to go into the EU West region. You can see it right here, and we've been failing over those workloads. And what we should see once everything's paired up, and once again it's getting a bunch of workloads that it didn't have before, so it might take a second, is we should see the workloads begin to synchronize. And as they come up,
I'm going to pull up a point of sale.
you're going to bring up the point of sale application.
Yeah.
And the location was Frankfurt before.
Yep.
And we can see that they're beginning to synchronize, okay? And let's find one of those workloads that is synchronized.
Actually,
you could do a policy sync sort.
Actually, let's do that.
It takes about 5 minutes for all the workloads it takes about 5 minutes for all the workloads to be able to find itself. So let's see what's happening here, because this is happening at large scale. So it's going to take a minute. Any one of the workloads?
Well, let me get out of the side.
Find any workload
Yeah.
that has a policy state. So he's going to find one of the workloads that's actually done the failover. So it's going to take a minute.
It's a lot of workloads.
It's a lot of workloads, and it's a live demo. So
Here, this one right
okay,
here.
there you go. Bring it up.
It's active.
So what we should see here is that it's now honed to that DR site, that policy compute engine, which was, before it was EU East, now it's EU West. Why don't you blow up the font so everybody can sort of see that right here? So it's this EU West data center where it was running in EU East. So the vents, as GSLB, as these vents heartbeat, they will find the new policy compute engine, and we've just done a complete disaster recovery for 75,000 workloads, okay? Any questions about this particular
I've got
demo?
a question.
Go ahead.
For your agent software, do you have feature parity across all the platforms that you support?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. And I think one of the other things is, I always like to think about how do these things get installed, and we have no religion around it yet again, because we've learned that some people just build into their base image. So like we have customers, when they launch a new application, it just gets ring fenced from day zero, okay? We have some customers, so literally every single Linux build, every single Windows build, it just gets installed on. People install it via automation. Some people do it via repos. We don't dictate how that's going to happen. In the same way that we can't dictate how they're going to pair those workloads to the policy compute engine. Some of them do it via that pairing key that I talked about earlier. Some of them do it via Kerberos tickets. Some of them do it. Some people do it via certificates. We have to go along with what the customer is going to use. We can't force a way of automation upon them. We have to just fit into whatever their pipeline looks like. Okay.
Seems that, but for large scale, you might have some recommendation.
Well, it depends, right? So I could tell you that the SaaS providers don't do it the same way that the banks do it, right? And they're both massive scales. Like we have SaaS providers with, in enforcement of north of 70,000 hosts, like doing full segmentation across a highly distributed enterprise, and they might do it slightly different than some of the large banks do it. We have to fit, like every organization is slightly different. In the same way, remember how I talked about how in our first demo, we enabled the application developers to develop policy? Some of the customers, they would never allow the developers to do that, but AppSec's allowed to do it. So we have to fit in with the organization. Okay? We can't be dictatorial about how you're going to do this, The one thing I can tell you is at massive scale, I've never seen the CIO or the CFO that's going to build a ministry of segmentation. And even if they did it, they wouldn't understand what was going on.
So
Okay?
it depends on their operational model, their culture. And
Yes. It really depends on the culture, and what we've learned is we have to fit within whatever that culture is. We can't force change. We have to fit into the company. And that's actually, I think, one of the best parts about the product is it can literally be chopped up via RBAC. You can deploy it like different companies want different deployment models. You can't say, oh, we have to put PCs only in Jersey City or only in Colorado. People put them where they want to put them, right? And they architect the way that they want to architect, and the software enables them to do that, okay?
Question.
Question.
So I've just been reading about containers and the sidecar deployment model. Have you
Okay, like
considered?
Istio or, yep.
Yeah, where you don't, instead of having to build the agent into the image, which may involve messing around with the layers that are already in a given container, you deploy a separate container and just pass the traffic through that.
Okay, you want to talk to that, PJ?
Yeah, I mean, those are different architectures. I mean, we do have a solution which you can install it on the host, and it can actually do the controls inside each of the container namespaces, right, to achieve the same goal, but without the overhead of necessarily a sidecar.
Yeah, having one for one does.
Yeah, one of the things we have seen in a lot of organizations is those containers, just like applications, never sit on the island of misfit toys. They often will reach into things that aren't containerized, right? And so one of the nice things about Illumio is you get a very, just like in the same way we showed you a distributed massive policy control plane and massive visibility, you get the same thing when you think about containers. Containers, you're going to have VMs, you might have some bare metal out there. And so it's, once again, it's this idea of single plane for visibility and a single plane for policy. All right?
We don't run into anybody who's just 100% containerized, right? And if you have a solution that's only works for containers, then you really have a gap in your solution. So you need something that works across all of those environments, as Matt said. So what happens is, in the case that there was a network partition, right? That the one member could not talk to the other member of the leader. It still can operate. So locally, things can still, like if there was a change or there were new workloads that came online, anything that can be served locally will continue to be processed, and new policy can be delivered to those workloads. Secondly, new flow data that sort of comes up, because it comes up locally, the leader will continue to come up. At the point where the network partition is resolved, then we'll get into the point of showing that there's now a replication log, that member is behind the leader or behind the other members, and you could sort of monitor that way till the issue sort of resolves itself. So that's how we solve that problem.
And by the way, you can see it synchronizing right now, right? We're still bringing up that EU West region, and so because this is live, you can sort of see that this is actually happening in the background. We have that EU West region needs to be, I understand there's the other 150,000 workloads and everything going on there, okay? So, anyway. All right.
One more question before you start came in from the internet. For Venn agents that are deployed to different operating systems, is there feature parity across all of those? Linux, Windows, et cetera?
Well, okay, so our sort of ethos on this is no kernel modifications, okay? And sometimes, like on Windows, there's things that are just natively supported in the operating system that aren't available in Linux, right? Classic example is processes. In Windows, you can look at system lsas.exe with a bunch of executables on the end, and that can come up on any port, right? The classic thing that you do if you've ever done like domain controllers, right? Domain controller synchronization can come up on any number of 10,000 high number ports. They care about the process more than they care about the port or protocol. So on Windows, we'll do process-based enforcement, because that same functionality is not available on Linux right now, natively in the kernel. At some point, it's going to make its way through, and we can do it. The only other thing which is slightly different is on AIX and Solaris, we don't do IPsec, because one of the other things we can do, which we haven't talked about here today, is we can actually turn up an IPsec tunnel between any combination of workloads. It could be Linux to Linux, Windows to Windows, Linux to Windows. We just haven't done AIX to AIX or Solaris to Solaris. Hasn't been a big requirement yet.
Yeah.
Okay?
Thank you.